A billionaire in a dark overcoat steps onto a nearly empty city bus and finds a tear-stained diary beneath the window seat. The hiss of the bus doors closing behind him barely registered. Grant Morgan stood still for a second, letting the dull warmth inside contrast the cold he hadn't even tried to shield himself from. His gloves remained stuffed in his coat pocket. His scarf was somewhere in the back seat of the black car he'd walked away from. It didn't matter. The bus groaned slightly as it pulled from the curb. Grant moved down the aisle slowly, his polished shoes thudding softly against the rubber floor. The few passengers present didn't give him more than a glance: a teenager with tangled earbuds, an elderly woman nursing a cup from the corner coffee shop. No one recognized him, and he liked it that way. He didn't know what brought him here exactly. The funeral had ended hours ago, and the polite condolences, the limp handshakes, the hollow mentions of "she was a good woman" had driven him to the edge of something he couldn't quite name. Instead of returning to his penthouse or burying himself in a boardroom, he'd found himself walking past his driver, past security, until the dirty blue and white blur of Bus Route 7 slid into view like an invitation he hadn't realized he was waiting for. He sat near the back, where the windows fogged up most, and let the hum of the engine fill the silence he wasn't ready to break. Then he saw it. A soft-worn corner of blue faux leather peeked out from the narrow gap between the seat cushion and the wall. He hesitated. The last time he'd bent down to pick something up in public, he'd been a teenager. But his hand reached for it before his mind had decided, and when his fingers brushed the cracked spine, something strange happened. He didn't let go. It was a diary. The cover was slightly torn at the edges, the kind that had once been cheap, but had since been handled so much it had taken on a kind of humble dignity. He flipped it open, surprised at the neat slanted handwriting inside. December 1st. Micah didn't eat the oatmeal this morning. Said it reminded him of the time we ran out of milk and had to make it with water. He's 7. How does he remember that? The ink was smudged in places, not from rain, he realized, but tears. Some of the pages curled slightly. Others bore indentations where the writer had pressed too hard with the pen. She hadn't just been writing. She'd been surviving. Sometimes I write just so I don't disappear. Grant's breath hitched. The bus rocked slightly as it turned, but he didn't look up. His thumb brushed over the page's edge, where a faint watermark of a snowflake had bled through the paper. The words weren't poetic or polished. They were real, brutally plainly real. Another entry caught his eye. Micah needs new glasses. His old ones are too small, and his teacher says he squints at the board. I told him we'd go next week, but next week is rent. Rent wins. Rent always wins. Grant blinked. The ache that settled in his chest was unfamiliar, unwelcome. He had spent the last week selecting coffin linings and flower arrangements, debating headstone fonts with people he hadn't seen in years. He hadn't cried. Not once. But now, staring at the ordinary heartbreak of someone else's Tuesday morning, his throat burned. The driver, a tall man in a gray cap and weathered hands, glanced back through the mirror. Grant didn't notice the look. He was already deep inside the pages. The next few pages unfolded like a whispered confession offered not to a friend, but to the silence between each night's exhaustion. There was a kind of rhythm to Elena's thoughts, mundane, anxious, funny, in a way that made Grant's lips twitch without warning. I tried to paint the bathroom today while Micah was at school. I got halfway up the wall before realizing I'd bought the wrong shade of white. Who knew there were so many kinds of white snowflake, white frosted moonlight, and apparently this one, hopeful morning. Spoiler alert, it dried gray. He leaned slightly against the window, though the fogged glass did little to offer a view. Snow pressed in from all sides. The bus made its slow route past old apartment buildings and half-lit gas stations. The world outside kept moving, but Grant remained still, held in place by ink and honesty. From the front, the bus driver's voice crackled through the intercom. Next stop, Lexington and Dale. Grant barely heard him. Micah asked if Santa goes to apartments or just houses. I told him Santa lives by love, not square footage. Then I cried in the hallway after he went to bed. Grant closed the diary for a moment, not because he was done, but because he wasn't ready for the next line. He held the little book in his hands like it might shatter if he gripped too tightly. The weight of it was absurd paper and glue, maybe 10 ounces total, but it felt heavier than anything he'd carried lately, including the expectations of a board of directors and the remains of a mother he no longer knew how to mourn. He looked up briefly. The teenager with earbuds had gotten off at the last stop. Only the older woman remained, now dozing softly, her hands tucked beneath a quilted purse. Across the aisle, the driver glanced at him again, this time with something like curiosity. Or perhaps recognition, though not the kind Grant was used to. He turned his eyes back to the pages. There's a man who comes to the bakery every Thursday morning. He wears mismatched socks and always tips, even when he just buys coffee. He told Micah once that his mom made the best pecan pie in Georgia. I don't know why that made me feel safe. I think I just want more things to feel safe. Grant didn't recognize the bakery or the man, but he recognized the ache underneath those words. His mother had once told him that kindness is what people do when no one's watching. He hadn't thought of that in years. The pages were getting more recent now. December entries. Micah had a cold. Elena worried it would turn into something worse, but couldn't take a day off work. She wrote about the bus, how she always sat in the same seat on Route 7 when she could, near the back, where it was quiet. She called it her quiet hour, a rare piece of the day where she didn't have to explain, fix, clean, or apologize. And then, I lost the diary today. I think it slipped out of my coat on the bus. It feels like losing a part of my spine. I keep thinking, what if someone finds it and reads it? What if they know too much, but then again, maybe it'll fall into the hands of someone who understands. Grant's breath caught. He reread that line 3 times. Then once more aloud, barely a whisper. Maybe it'll fall into the hands of someone who understands. He glanced up. Snow was now falling harder, ticking softly against the windows, like anxious fingers tapping glass. The driver had begun humming to himself, low and tuneless, as the bus glided through a wide intersection lined with blinking holiday lights. Grant looked back at the diary, then at the seat it had been wedged beneath. She hadn't left it behind. She'd lost it. She'd lost it. That thought wouldn't leave him. It looped in his mind like a quiet alarm, soft but persistent. He imagined her, Elena, stepping off this very bus, perhaps juggling a backpack, a lunch bag, and a tired child in tow, unaware that a small part of herself had slipped through the cracks of her day and fallen to the floor. Grant's fingers curled more tightly around the diary. He didn't know what she looked like. He didn't know which Thursday bakery she worked at or what part of town she called home. He didn't know how old Micah was now or if he'd finally gotten those glasses. But he knew this. The woman who had written these words was not asking for help, but she damn well deserved it. The bus made another stop. A young man climbed aboard, shaking snow from his hoodie, and slumped into a seat near the front. The older woman had vanished 2 stops ago. Grant hadn't noticed. He stared at the pages again, as if some hidden clue might reveal itself if he looked long enough. One margin had a coffee stain. Another had the faint imprint of a child's doodle pressed through the paper, looping circles that might have been planets or simply boredom. He flipped toward the front of the diary, searching for a name beyond the signature in each entry. Nothing. Then, tucked into the inner pocket of the back cover, a small scrap of paper peeked out, folded, once nearly translucent from being handled. He unfolded it. A grocery list. Bananas, ibuprofen, a note that said, "Check Micah's backpack for teacher letter." At the bottom, in faint pencil, Elena J. Aptern 304. No address, no building name, just that. The information was nearly useless. But to Grant, it might as well have been a gold thread in a haystack of snow. He ran a hand over his jaw, which was already rough with end-of-day stubble. He hadn't meant to care. That wasn't part of today's plan. Hell, he hadn't had a plan beyond escaping the sound of funeral hymns still ringing in his ears. And yet here he was, sitting on a public bus, with a stranger's diary in his lap, heart thudding like he'd just remembered something important after years of forgetting. The bus driver slowed as they approached another intersection. The lights above blinked red against the snow-heavy sky. Grant glanced up and caught the driver's eyes in the mirror. The man didn't speak, but there was something in his gaze like he already knew. Grant had found something he wasn't meant to ignore. Grant stood. He tucked the diary into the inner pocket of his overcoat right against his chest. His gloves were still in his pocket, untouched. The doors hissed open as the bus came to a gentle stop at the frozen corner. Snow flurried across the windshield, swirling in the glare of the streetlights. Holiday lights strung between lampposts blinked lazily in reds and greens. Grant paused on the bottom step of the bus, looking out at the quiet city that no longer felt quite so cold. He whispered, "I have to find her," as the bus pulled into a frozen intersection filled with blinking red lights. The diary mentions Mrs. Delilah at 12th and Juniper, still saving the good apples for Noah. Grant tightened the scarf around his neck, not for the cold, but to keep the wind from snapping against the side of his face, like a reminder that he didn't belong here. Not in these streets, not in these shoes. The boots he wore had been in the back of his closet since a corporate retreat 3 years ago. They pinched slightly at the heel, but gave better traction over the slick sidewalks of Frost Hill than his usual Italian leather. This part of St. Paul didn't see many billionaires wandering its cracked pavement or stopping to study the weathered street signs like breadcrumbs on a trail. But Grant wasn't here to be seen. He was here to see. At the corner of 12th and Juniper stood a small grocery store, its display window fogged with condensation and taped up flyers for church suppers and piano lessons. A strand of tired Christmas lights flickered along the roofline. The hand-painted sign above the door read, "Delilah's." No last name, just Delilah. He pushed open the door. A soft bell jingled, and warmth thick with the scent of apples and gingerbread wrapped around him. A short woman with a braided gray bun looked up from behind the counter. She wore a forest green cardigan and glasses that hung low on her nose, giving her the look of someone who saw everything and missed nothing. "Morning," she said, but her tone was more habit than welcome. Grant offered a polite nod. "Looking for something sweet?" "I heard this was the place." Delilah didn't smile. Her eyes flicked to his coat, his boots the fine watch peeking from his cuff. "We got apples. Good ones. That's what you want." He hesitated. "Actually, I read something about a boy named Noah. Said you saved the good apples for him." Her face didn't change, but the air around them did. Something braced itself behind her expression, like a door closing quietly. "Lot of kids come through here," she said. "I save apples for lots of folks." Grant nodded slowly. "Of course. Sorry. Just," the name stood out, "I'm looking into some potential outreach programs for families in the area. Learning about community touchpoints, places that matter." Delilah gave a low, and leaned on the counter. "You from the city council?" "No, private sector. Just doing some looking." Her eyes stayed steady on him. "And you decided to start here." Grant let the silence hang a second too long. A dog barked somewhere behind the store. Grant turned his head instinctively toward the sound. The diary had mentioned that too. Elena wrote once that the dog behind Delilah's store barked at everyone except Micah. He cleared his throat. "Is there somewhere to get coffee nearby?" Delilah pointed with her chin. "Across the street. Corner table at Rudy's stays, empty most mornings. They don't have Wi-Fi, so nobody under 30 stays long." "Sounds perfect." He smiled and turned toward the door, but she called out just before he stepped outside. "They still live around here, if that's what you were really asking." Grant paused. "Thank you." He stepped back into the cold, letting the words roll around in his mind. They still live around here. That was something. Not an address, but a direction. Across the street, Rudy's Cafe smelled like cinnamon and burnt espresso. Grant ordered black coffee, then reached for the shaker of cinnamon out of habit and stopped. The diary. Elena once wrote, "It's a silly thing, but cinnamon in coffee makes me feel like things are okay again, even just for a few sips." He added a generous shake, The coffee was stronger than he liked, but the cinnamon made it bearable. He sat at the corner table with his coat still on, watching frost slide slowly down the window as the inside fogged up from the cafe's radiators. He had the diary folded into the inside pocket of his coat, tucked close like something sacred. On the table sat a small plastic container for Creamer's mismatched sugar packets and a laminated menu with breakfast combos that hadn't changed since the Clinton administration. The hum of a ceiling fan overhead, mixed with the scrape of spoons on ceramic mugs and the occasional clink of silverware. A waitress with tired eyes and a sharp ponytail approached, filling his water glass without asking. "You gonna order or just hide from the cold?" she asked, not unkindly. "Both," Grant said. "What's good here?" She pointed at a dish without looking at the menu. The Rudy special. Eggs, toast bacon, or turkey sausage, and hash browns with that secret seasoning no one knows the name of. "I'll take it," Grant said. "Turkey sausage." She nodded, jotted it down. "You're new. Nobody sits here unless they're waiting for somebody or running from something." He offered a small smile, maybe a little of both. As she walked away, Grant pulled out his phone and tapped a quick message to Mira. "Please reschedule today's board meeting. Tell them something came up. I'll call in tomorrow." She replied almost instantly. "You okay? You haven't been to the office in 3 days. People are talking." He stared at the blinking cursor before replying. "I'm following something important. I'll explain soon." He slipped the phone face down and exhaled. He didn't want to lie to Mira. She was one of the few constants in his life. But how could he explain that a forgotten diary on a bus had made him feel more connected to humanity than all the shareholder reports in his inbox? The food arrived. It was better than it had any right to be. The toast was buttered to the edges, the hash browns crisp, the eggs fluffy. He found himself eating slowly, deliberately, like each bite kept him tethered to this world, her world. After breakfast, he walked 2 blocks down to the Frost Hill Library, a sandstone building with chipped columns and steps that creaked louder than the doors. The interior smelled like old paper wood polish and the quiet hum of stillness. It was nearly empty, just an older man reading the newspaper near the radiator and a young woman typing furiously on a desktop from another decade. Grant wandered the aisles, unsure of what he was looking for, until he found the donations cart tucked near the entrance. A collection of used books, some with cracked spines and yellowed pages, others with sticky notes still inside. He thumbed through them absently until a faded teal hardcover caught his eye. Inside, a note was tucked between the pages, written in careful print. "To whoever reads this, you matter more than you think." His breath caught. It was Elena's handwriting. He'd memorized the curve of her R's, the slanted angle of her T's. This wasn't just some anonymous affirmation, this was her. He closed the book gently, heart thudding. Someone had held this. Someone had decided not to throw it away, but to leave a piece of her behind for a stranger to find. He turned toward the front desk. An older man with kind eyes and a Minnesota Twins cap sat behind the counter. Grant walked over, holding out the note. "Do you know who might have donated this?" The librarian adjusted his glasses. "We get dozens of donations a week. Hard to say. Folks drop them in the bin by the door." Grant nodded, disappointed, but not surprised. "She a friend of yours?" the librarian asked, eyeing the handwriting. Grant hesitated. "Something like that." Outside, the sky was starting to darken, even though it wasn't yet 4 p.m. He zipped his coat and pulled his scarf tighter. The wind carried a bite, but he barely noticed. By the time Grant returned to the corner of 12th and Juniper, the wind had grown teeth. He adjusted the scarf around his neck, the one Mira had given him last Christmas, but he'd never worn until now. The diary remained in his coat pocket, close to his chest. The little grocery stood like it had for decades, peeling green trim, frosted glass door, and a string of holiday bells that jingled as he entered. The warmth hit him instantly, heavy with the scent of cinnamon apples, pine-scented cleaner, and something fried. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s with salt and pepper braids pulled back into a thick bun. She was wiping down the register with the kind of precision that said she didn't miss much. "Afternoon," she said without looking up. If you're selling anything, I'm not interested. If you're casing the place, I've got a baseball bat under the counter. Grant almost smiled. Neither. I'm just curious about a boy named Noah. That got her attention. She stopped wiping and looked up slowly, eyes narrowing behind round glasses. Who's asking? A friend, he said quickly. Not of Noah's, of someone who mentioned him in writing. Her expression didn't soften. You a social worker, cop, city inspector? No. I'm in business? Grant replied carefully. I'm working on a project involving local community support, outreach, human stories. Now her eyebrows rose. And someone wrote about me? He hesitated, then nodded. They mentioned you saved the good apples for Noah. Her lips pressed together. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached behind the counter, pulled out a red apple, rubbed it on her apron, and set it on the counter. That's still true. Grant's voice dropped. They still live nearby. Another pause. Delilah studied him the way someone might study a rain cloud that hadn't yet decided whether to bless or ruin the day. Then she nodded barely. Around. Grant shifted. I'm not trying to intrude. I found something. A diary? I think it belongs to... But he didn't get the rest out. Her eyes dropped instantly to the shape in his coat pocket. The spine of the diary had shifted just enough to be visible a soft blue faux leather edge that peaked like an accusation. She moved around the counter fast for someone her age standing just feet from him now. You found her journal, didn't you? Grant exhaled slow. Yes. Delilah's face changed, not shock, but something closer to worry. Her hands folded in front of her apron. She didn't mean for anyone to see that. I know, Grant said softly. I think she lost it on the bus. I've read parts of it. I'm not here to expose her. I couldn't walk away. Delilah studied him again, longer this time. Then she looked away toward the old wooden door, toward the street thick with slush and silence. She wrote because the world wouldn't listen, Delilah said finally. That's all that diary was, a place to whisper. I want to listen, Grant said, and he meant it. Delilah was quiet a long time. Then, in a voice low and weighted with something unsaid, she murmured, Maybe this is the way. The moment he sees the little boy helping a stray cat cross the street, he knows this is Noah. There wasn't much logic to it. Grant had never seen a photo, never asked for a description, but something about the boy's small hands guiding the fluff of orange fur gently across the slush, his oversized blue glasses slipping down his nose, the way he bent low to whisper encouragement, like it mattered. Grant just knew. He stood across the street from the Sunset Hollow Community Center, half shielded behind a metal bus stop sign. His breath curled in the December air, but he didn't feel the cold. Not really. The diary's soft spine pressed against his chest under his coat, where he'd started keeping it after the grocery store encounter. Safer that way, closer. Noah clapped once as the cat scurried onto the sidewalk, then ran back toward the building, one snow boot flapping slightly loose. Miss Elena, he called out, waving something red in his mittened hand. That name made Grant's heart pause. His gaze followed the boy until it landed on her. Elena Hayes stood at the edge of the playground, bent slightly as she tied a younger child's scarf. Her laugh floated up soft and real, like something he'd only read in the diary until now. Wisps of dark hair escaped her knit beanie, and when she straightened, her cheeks were flushed from the cold. She looked both tired and beautifully alive. Grant didn't move. He watched as Noah ran up to her and pressed the red construction paper into her hand. She leaned down, read the card, and placed her hand over her chest, then kissed the top of his knit cap. He beamed. She mouthed something, thank you maybe, and tucked the card into her coat. Grant's throat felt tight. He hadn't planned to see them, not yet. But after Delilah's half-blessing, half-warning, his feet had simply carried him here. Just to watch, he told himself. Just to understand. Kids squealed as they hopped along a crooked, chalk-drawn hopscotch path, boots smudging the numbers. A teen pushed open the door of the community center, and Grant caught a glimpse of the warm light inside paper snowflakes, a bulletin board filled with photos. A giant poster that read, "You matter here." A flyer flapped on the wall outside, barely pinned under a magnet. "Volunteers welcome. All hearts needed." Grant walked slowly up the steps, his boots crunching softly on packed snow. No one noticed him. Not yet. He reached out and took the flyer with one gloved hand, folded it, and slipped it into his coat pocket opposite the diary. As he turned to leave, the door opened again. "Delilah." She blinked at him like she'd seen a ghost. "Didn't expect you so soon." He smiled sheepishly. "I wasn't planning to come. I just wanted to see." She eyed the flyer sticking slightly out of his pocket, then nodded once. "She's good people. I can see that. She doesn't need trouble." Grant looked down at the steps. "I'm not here to cause any." After a long pause, Delilah's voice softened. "Then maybe you ought to be useful." He nodded, almost a bow, and descended the steps into the crisp afternoon air. That evening, back at his penthouse, that now felt too big, too silent, Grant stood at the kitchen counter, with the flyer laid flat before him. "Volunteers, welcome. All hearts needed." The words were handwritten in thick green marker, punctuated with a crooked, smiley face. He didn't usually act without a plan. Most of his life had been checklists, cost-benefit analyses, contracts signed in triplicate. But this was different. This wasn't about strategy. It was about something else entirely. Maybe redemption. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something softer he didn't dare name. He placed the flyer beside the diary and poured himself a cup of tea. No coffee tonight. Cinnamon tea, because that's what she'd mentioned in the entry about cold mornings and snow stuck to the soles of old boots. He flipped to that page again, rereading lines he'd nearly memorized. "Noah likes cinnamon toast on Saturdays. Says it makes him feel like the world's not as hard as it is. I told him that makes two of us." His eyes lingered on the handwriting, slanted and sometimes rushed. He imagined her curled on a worn couch pen between her fingers, trying to squeeze thoughts into a space that didn't always make room for her. Without overthinking it, Grant walked to his study, pulled open a drawer, and took out an unused leather-bound journal gifted to him by a board member years ago. He sat, opened to the first page, and began to write. "Dear E.H., I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, write back, but something about today made it impossible not to. Your son saved a cat, and in doing so, saved something in me." His pen hesitated, hovered, then moved again. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I think I'd like to learn. Elliot." He didn't sign his real name. Not out of shame, just instinct. There was something clean about the middle name his mother once called him when tucking him into bed, back when love felt simple and free of performance. The next morning, Grant stood in front of the Sunset Hollow Community Center, again wearing jeans and a plain navy coat. The boots were practical, no cufflinks, no assistant. He stepped inside and was met with the sound of children's laughter, clattering puzzles, and the smell of crayons and toast. A woman at the desk looked up from a clipboard. "You here for the volunteer intake?" He nodded. "Yes, name's Elliot." She smiled, handed him a form, and gestured toward a line of chairs against the far wall. He sat, filled out basic info, omitting the parts that would raise questions. No employer listed, no home address beyond Midtown. As he waited, he noticed the hallway had a mural, bright paint's fingerprints, shaped like flowers, and the phrase, "Kindness grows here," scrawled across the top. His gaze softened. "Elliot," a voice called. He stood. Elena stood a few feet away, a clipboard hugged to her chest. She wore a burgundy sweater with tiny silver threads, and her smile was kind, but guarded. "I'm Elena. I oversee the center. Thanks for showing up. We always need extra hands." Grant Elliott extended his hand, unsure if she'd take it. She did. Her grip was firm, brief. "You've been around kids before." "Not in a long time," he admitted. "Well, they'll make sure you learn fast. We've got puzzles in room A, story time in B, and chaos pretty much everywhere else. Where do you feel useful?" He smiled, surprising even himself. "Wherever you need me." She gave him a curious look, as if trying to place something about him. Then she turned. "Follow me." As they walked, he caught glimpses of children playing games, coloring pages tacked to the walls, a corkboard labeled, "What We're Thankful For," one note read, "Miss Elena's Smile." In room B, a half-circle of children sat on a carpet waiting. "You're on book duty," Elena said, handing him a worn paperback titled Corduroy's Winter Surprise. He blinked. "You sure?" She winked. "You said wherever." He sat in the tiny chair, knees up to his chest, and opened the book. Halfway through, he noticed Noah in the back, eyes wide, blue glasses slightly crooked. The boy didn't say anything, just watched. When the story ended, tiny hands clapped. Elena mouthed a silent thank you across the room. After story time, the children scattered like winter birds. Some dashed off toward the snack table, others to a row of wooden blocks stacked like castles in a corner. Grant stood awkwardly unsure whether to stay seated or vanish quietly, but Elena caught him before he could move. "You've got a good voice for reading," she said with a half smile. "Warm, steady. Not a lot of people can keep their attention." He shrugged. "I guess I was just reading it the way I used to imagine books sounding when I was their age." She tilted her head, surprised. Not a lot of people admit they imagined things when they were young. He didn't answer, but something passed between them. A flicker of recognition, maybe not yet of identity, but of emotion. A shared ache that hadn't yet found words. They walked together to the small kitchen, where paper cups of apple juice and graham crackers were laid out. Grant reached for a cup when Delilah entered, her scarf dusted with snow. "Well, I'll be," she said, spotting him. Her eyes narrowed, a mix of suspicion and curiosity flashing behind them. Elena glanced between them. "You two know each other." Grant shook his head. "Only in passing. I came by the grocery last week." Delilah gave a slow, knowing nod. "That you did." She didn't press further, just reached for the kettle and began making tea, but her presence lingered like the scent of something burning on low. Noah appeared, then bounding in with boots half-laced, his oversized blue glasses sliding down his nose. He held a crumpled piece of paper, his cheeks red from the cold. "Miss Elena," he chirped, waving the page like a flag. "I made you something." She knelt, receiving the paper with care. It was a drawing stick, figures under a big sun, a house with smoke curling from the chimney, and a woman with curly hair standing next to a boy in glasses. The caption in a child's jagged writing read, "My mom is the warmest place in winter." Elena pressed a hand to her chest. "Noah, this is beautiful." The boy beamed. "You can put it on the wall if you want." "I'll frame it," she promised. That's when Noah turned to Grant. The little boy walked right up, squinting like he was trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. He sniffed once, tilted his head, then stepped closer still. "You smell like cinnamon toast," Noah said, his voice calm but sure. "Like my dad used to." Time seemed to stutter. Elena froze, still crouched. Delilah's stirring spoon paused mid-clink. Grant didn't move. Couldn't. The boy looked up, glasses slipping again. "Did you know him?" Grant swallowed, voice just above a whisper. "No, buddy. I didn't." Noah didn't seem disappointed. He just gave a thoughtful nod, like he'd asked the weather if it planned to snow and gotten a reasonable answer. Then he turned and ran off again, already calling to a friend about building a snow fort before pickup time. Elena stood slowly, her eyes scanning Grant's face with a quiet intensity. "He has a strong nose," she said with a soft chuckle, trying to diffuse the moment. Grant smiled tightly, but the edges of his calm had been knocked loose. He didn't know what startled him more, Noah's words, or how much he'd wanted them to be true. Later, as he slipped on his coat in the hallway, he reached for the inner pocket out of habit. The diary was there, resting just above his heart, where he kept it now. Not tucked away in a briefcase, not hidden. Close. The weight of it wasn't heavy. Not anymore. It was grounding. He stepped out into the cold boots, crunching the salted steps, the air biting at his cheeks. Behind him, inside the glowing windows of the center, laughter spilled out like light from a cracked door. But all he could hear was Noah's voice. "You smell like cinnamon toast, like my dad used to." Elena stood in the attic room, with her arms folded tight across her chest. The slanted ceiling still creaked in the same places. The single window framed by frost let in a muted January light that caught the tiny flecks of dust swirling in the air. The radiator hummed its tired song, and the faintest trace of lavender still clung to the old scarf hanging from the bedpost. She had once rebuilt her life in this room, stitched herself back together one sleepless night at a time. And now, for reasons that tugged at the edge of logic, she was letting a stranger sleep here. Downstairs, the center still buzzed. The heater Grant No Elliot had repaired was finally holding. Kids weren't huddled around space heaters anymore. They could play paint nap in warmth. Elena didn't say it out loud, but she noticed the difference the man made. Every day something small got fixed. A hinge that stopped squeaking. A coat hook replaced. Even the toilet that wouldn't stop running it was quiet now. He hadn't asked for anything, not even recognition. Grant, still going by Elliot, folded a faded quilt Delilah had left on the staircase. He tucked it under one arm and climbed the stairs carefully, as if the creaks beneath his boots might betray him. When he reached the landing, Elena was still there, her eyes scanning the corners of the room, like it might have changed while she wasn't looking. "Hope this helps," he said, lifting the quilt slightly. "Place feels like it wants to hold a chill." She turned, startled, but didn't step back. "It always does in winter. The walls remember." He smiled, then hesitated. "Thanks, and for letting me stay here tonight. I know it's not exactly a Marriott. It's not meant to be." Her voice softened. "But it's safe, and it's quiet. Sometimes that's enough." Grant nodded. His coat still held the scent of cinnamon from the center's afternoon snack, Elena's idea. Cinnamon toast and warm milk. Simple things for long afternoons. The kind of comfort he hadn't tasted in decades. "I'll be out early," he said. "Don't want to be in anyone's way." "You're not." Her words came too quickly, then too late. She caught herself, then shrugged. "I mean, you're helping. We don't have many like you." He looked around the attic again, noting the chipped paint along the window frame, the tiny bookshelf leaning tiredly in the corner. "I can fix that shelf tomorrow," he offered. She nodded. "Only if you want to." The pause between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of things unsaid, and maybe things not ready to be said. Elena stepped aside, brushing past him to the stairwell, then turned back with a quiet thought. "That scarf," she said, motioning to the one he wore. "It belonged to someone who never came back." Grant touched it instinctively. "Would you rather I not—" "No," she interrupted gently. "I gave it to you." Then she descended the stairs, each creak of the wood like a heartbeat. That night, snow piled silently outside the dormer window. The radiator clanked occasionally in protest, and Grant sat at the edge of the narrow bed diary open in his lap. He wasn't writing for himself anymore. He flipped past Elena's old entries. He had read them all a dozen times now, and turned to the blank pages she had never filled. Hey, tonight I saw you place your hand on Noah's back while he slept. Just your fingers light as a whisper. You didn't say anything. You just stayed there, like your presence alone was enough to keep the monsters away. I don't know how you keep doing this, waking up, giving more of yourself, still finding warmth for the world. I wore the scarf today. It smelled like burnt toast at first, but now it smells like something I can't name. Like maybe I belong here. He closed the diary and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, closer to his chest than before. The room smelled of lavender and radiator steam. His gloves were on the floor, where he had dropped them forgotten. The cold didn't matter anymore. By morning, the world had turned white. Snow drifted in sheets outside the windows, muffling the usual city sounds. Grant woke early, stretching stiff muscles and watching the frost crawl lazily along the attic glass. He didn't need to check the forecast. The storm was real, and it had no intention of leaving quickly. Downstairs, the center stirred with early arrivals, volunteers checking in, a mother asking if lunch would still be served, a janitor muttering about salt and frozen steps. Grant pulled on his boots and descended, already tucking his scarf, the one Elena gave him, tighter around his neck. The community center felt different now. Not just warmer, but fuller. It buzzed in a way he hadn't felt since ever. As he passed through the halls, he nodded to a kid he'd helped with spelling flashcards 2 days ago. The boy grinned and pointed to his worksheet, which now had a gold star at the top. Elna stood near the front desk, her coat still dusted with fresh flakes. She was giving directions to a pair of teenagers, probably volunteers, when she spotted him. "Morning," she said. "You're already here?" he asked, surprised. "Storm like this doesn't stop us, and you're up early." He lifted a coffee mug he'd swiped from the break room. "Needed caffeine before I become useful." Her smile was quick, but real. "Good. The heater in the reading room's gone out again. Think you've got one more miracle left." "Only one." They shared a glance, brief, layered, and then moved. No need to explain what came next. By noon, the wind picked up. Elena canceled all outdoor activities. Volunteers handed out extra scarves and socks. Curtis arrived with 2 bags of groceries and a tired smile. He grunted hello at Grant, still unsure of Elliot, but less guarded now. "He's been a help," Elena offered quietly to Curtis as they organized canned goods. "Hasn't asked for anything." Curtis only nodded. "We'll see." Later, when the building began to quiet for the evening, Elena brought Grant a folded pile of blankets. "Attic'll be colder tonight," she said, setting them on the small chair near the window. "This one's thick. From Noah's old bed." He took them, surprised by the gesture. "You didn't have to." "I know." He hesitated. "Thank you." Elena lingered a moment longer. "Would you like some tea?" It was just after midnight when they sat across from each other in the kitchen, mug-steaming lights dimmed. The snow painted the windows white. Grant kept his elbows on the table, careful not to speak too loud. The silence between them was the kind that wrapped around grief and gentleness alike. "Noah told me today he likes you," Elena said softly. Grant blinked. "He did. He said you're the only one who listens to his stories all the way through." Grant chuckled. "They're good stories." She looked down at her tea. "He never really had anyone stick around. Not after his dad." Something in her voice cracked. It wasn't big, just a shift in air pressure, a note bent wrong, but it stayed with him. Elena didn't look up. "Noah was 2 when my husband left. Just a note, nothing else." "I'm sorry," Grant said, meaning it. "You don't have to be." She brushed her hair behind her ear, breathing carefully. "It happened. I don't want pity." "It's not pity," he replied, quieter. "It's, I don't know. Admiration, maybe." She met his eyes, then just for a breath. "He deserves everything," she said. "Sometimes I think I'll never give him enough." "You already do," Grant whispered. The tea grew cold in their hands, but neither moved. Something had shifted in the air, delicate and real. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. After she left him for the night, Grant remained in the kitchen. He stood by the old oven, the ceramic tile underfoot, cool through his socks. Then, just as he turned to leave, a sound caught him. Soft, guttural, not meant for ears. He paused, then realized it was coming from the other side of the kitchen door. A half-closed panel near the pantry, where the hallway light spilled dimly across the floor. He crept closer, not meaning to spy, just drawn. It was Elena. She was sitting on the tile floor, knees tucked up, face buried in the crook of her arm. Her shoulders shook once, then again. "Thank you," she whispered into nothing. "I don't know who sent him, but thank you." Grant's chest tightened. He could have said something, stepped forward, revealed the truth, told her who he really was, what he'd read, how much of her life had already reshaped his own. But he didn't. He backed away instead, his breath caught between guilt and longing. Grant returned quietly to the attic, the hush of fresh snow outside mirrored by the stillness inside him. He took off his coat, slowly folding it over the chair. The scarf Elena had given him slipped from his neck, falling in a soft heap. He let it be. For once, he didn't need to fix anything. He sat at the edge of the narrow bed, the old radiator clinking faintly behind him, and pulled the diary from his inner coat pocket. His pen hovered above the page for several seconds, unsure how to translate the weight pressing into his chest. Then he began to write. Tonight you cried alone in a kitchen that smells like nutmeg and old paint. You thank the dark as if someone or something had sent me here. You don't know how right you are. But I'm not who you think I am. And every minute I stay silent, it gets harder to imagine a version of this where I don't break your trust. Still I stayed. Still I will wake up here tomorrow and fix what needs fixing. Still I will listen when Noah talks about stars and cats and things that never make sense to anyone but him. I want to be someone he'd look up to. But I don't even know if I deserve that anymore. He closed the diary, slowly running his hand across the worn faux leather cover. The moonlight coming through the attic window caught the corner of the scarf still lying on the floor. It shimmered faintly like memory, or maybe mercy. His phone buzzed inside his coat. He stared at it for a long beat before picking it up. Mira, we found her. We know who she is. You have to decide today. Grant's stomach sank. The room seemed to shrink around him. The decision he'd postponed, buried beneath every plank he nailed, every heater he fixed, every cup of tea shared in silence, was now clawing its way to the surface. He stood slowly, the old floorboards groaning under his weight, and looked around the attic one more time. It didn't feel like just a room anymore. It felt like a promise. Mira texts, we found her. We know who she is. You have to decide today. Noah lies sick with fever and calls out for Dad, even though he's never met him. The smell of hand sanitizer and lemon floor cleaner clung to the pediatric clinic like a second skin. Elena paced between the faded seats of the waiting room, her coat unbuttoned, scarf dragging slightly on the floor. Her fingers clutched a half-finished knit glove for Noah, the stitches uneven, made with tired hands and sleepless nights. Across from her, Grant sat stiffly, elbows on knees, trying to look calm while his heart thundered in his chest. Noah had collapsed that morning. They were playing a simple card game on the rug at the community center when Noah's smile suddenly faltered. He swayed, blinking fast, and then folded to the side like a leaf letting go. Elena had screamed. Grant had caught him mid-fall, now of tubes threaded into Noah's small wrist. His face burned red with fever, lips cracked, curls matted to his forehead. Grant had never known a kind of helplessness that made him feel this small. Not even at his mother's death had he felt so desperate to trade places. He's dehydrated, the nurse had said gently. We'll keep him overnight. Viral strain likely. But we need to monitor his breathing. Elena had nodded, but barely. She hadn't blinked since. In the small hospital room, under dim blue light, Grant sat beside Noah, brushing a damp cloth along the boy's temple. Noah stirred. Dad, he mumbled, voice hoarse, eyes closed. Grant froze. Elena turned so fast the chair creaked. Her eyes darted from Noah to Grant, searching, stunned. Grant didn't move. He couldn't. I think he means his real dad, he said softly, not meeting her gaze. Noah doesn't have memories of him. She whispered more to herself than to Grant. He left when Noah was 2. He doesn't remember. So why would he? But the question faded. Her eyes filled with something else. Something Grant couldn't name. He didn't dare speak. Elena stood and leaned over Noah, tucking the blanket tighter around his small frame. She brushed a kiss to his cheek. I'm here, baby. Mama's here. Grant stood slowly, throat tight. He walked into the hallway and let the air hit his lungs like punishment. The lights above flickered once, and a gust of cold wind rattled the clinic's front doors. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering. He didn't know who to call. His chest felt hollow, but not in a dead way, in a way that hurt deeply. Then the screen lit up. Mira, where are you? Press has your scent. They're circling. We need to talk. He didn't reply. Instead, he typed a note in his phone, then deleted it. Then typed again. I don't know who I am when I'm with her, but it feels like the only version of me I want to keep. He didn't send it. Mira arrived just past midnight. She stood in the hallway of the pediatric clinic, wrapped in a long camel coat, dark hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes sharp as ever. The sharp click of her boots echoed louder than necessary. Grant looked up from the vending machine, where he had been staring at a pack of cinnamon crackers he hadn't bought. Don't say anything, he said preemptively. I wasn't going to, she answered, her voice quiet but edged. They walked together toward the far end of the corridor, near a window that overlooked the frozen parking lot. Icicles clung to the awning, sharp and glinting. Mira crossed her arms, watching Grant, like she was measuring the depth of a hole he'd willingly jumped into. "She's the one," she said finally. He nodded. "And the boy?" Grant hesitated. "I don't know what I am to him, but I want to be something solid." "You can't be solid while lying, Grant." He winced. Mira never used his name anymore unless she meant it. "I didn't plan this," he said. "I know," she replied. "But you stayed. That was the decision. And now everything you do ripples out. The board wants to know if the rumors are true. Someone saw you near Frost Hill. Elena's name is floating in circles it was never meant to touch." He leaned his forehead against the cold glass. "I'm not leaving her, not this time." Mira was quiet for a moment, then reached into her coat pocket and handed him something, a folded piece of notepaper, yellowed with age. "What's this?" "A note. Your mother wrote it. She left dozens like this in library books, coat pockets, food pantries." "You didn't know that?" He shook his head. Grant unfolded the paper. It read in his mother's familiar looping hand, "You are seen. You are not invisible. Someone in this world is grateful for your existence." The weight of it nearly knocked the breath from him. Suddenly the memory surged back. He was a boy again, watching her slip little notes into strangers' grocery bags while he tugged at her coat, embarrassed. "I never understood why she did that," he whispered. "She did," Mira said softly, "because she once needed one of those notes herself." Silence stretched between them. "You love Elena," Mira said, eyes narrowing. "But she doesn't love you. She loves Elliot." Grant's jaw tensed. "She's not in love with you, Grant. Not yet. She's in love with a shadow of you. A version you control. That's not love. That's theater." He closed his eyes. The truth stung more than any confrontation he'd had in a boardroom. "She deserves the real you," Mira finished, "even if it ruins everything." Later that morning, the clinic room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitors and the rustle of a blanket being shifted. Grant had returned to Noah's bedside before dawn, after Mira left. He hadn't slept. The chair was too hard, the air too dry, and his conscience wouldn't let him close his eyes. Noah stirred, eyelids fluttering. His small hand moved under the sheets, searching until it found Grant's. Grant closed his fingers gently around the boy's. "You're here?" Noah mumbled, eyes barely open. "I'm here," Grant whispered back, swallowing thickly. Noah gave a weak smile, his lips pale. "You smell like cinnamon toast." Grant chuckled through his nose, surprised by how fast his tears welled. Noah closed his eyes again, and after a few moments his breathing deepened. A nurse peeked in and nodded approvingly at the sight of them, then slipped away without a word. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a pinkish tint over the snow outside the window when Elena entered the room. Her steps were soft, deliberate, like someone afraid to wake a dream. Grant stood to let her sit, but she shook her head, her eyes never leaving her son. She crossed the room slowly and placed her hand over both of theirs. "He's doing better," she said almost to herself. "He's strong," Grant replied, voice hoarse. Elena looked at him, then really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. It was as if she were searching for something just beneath the surface of his face. "I've been so alone in this," she whispered. "So long." "You're not alone now." The words left him before he could filter them. And he meant them. God, he meant them. Her lips parted slightly as if to answer, but then Noah stirred again. "Dad," he murmured, barely audible. Both of them froze. Noah didn't wake. His hand simply tightened its grip around Grant's. Elena inhaled sharply. She stared at her son, then at Grant, her face a mix of confusion, fear, and something else. Hope, grief. It was hard to name. Grant opened his mouth. The truth was, there trembling behind his teeth. But she turned away. Without a word, Elena stepped toward the window and stood with her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Grant sat back down, unable to look at her. His hand was still in Noah's. Noah calls him Dad again in sleep, and Elena hears it. The room at the very back of Sunset Hollow was once a storage closet. Now, with the addition of a battered love seat, mismatched mugs, and a space heater that hummed like an old radio, it had become a sanctuary. Grant stood in that quiet room, diary in hand. Outside, laughter echoed. The spring fundraiser was in full swing. Children chased balloons, neighbors browsed baked goods and second-hand books, and a band of teenagers tried their best to stay in tune beneath a canopy of early March sunlight. He could hear it all muffled by the thick door, the world moving on. Inside it was still. He walked to the wooden table near the window. The surface was nicked and worn, but it caught the light just right. He opened the blue faux leather cover of the diary, Elena's diary, and found a blank page. His hand shook slightly as he wrote, "I read your words before I ever saw your face. They undid me. Every word, every hope, every fear. I thought I was saving you. But truth is, you saved me before I even knew your name." He paused, swallowed, and continued, "If you never forgive me, I understand. But if you look at Noah's eyes the way I have, maybe you'll see that love isn't always born perfect. It grows wild and messy and brave, like you." He closed the book softly, then turned it so the open page faced outward, just like she used to leave it on the windowsill when she didn't know anyone was watching. With one last glance around the room, he placed it in the center of the table and left. Out in the hallway, Delilah was directing two teenagers setting up a cotton candy booth. She noticed Grant as he slipped from the quiet room and gave him a slow nod, not approval, not quite forgiveness, just understanding. He nodded back. He moved through the crowd like a man underwater, faces blurred, voices distant. Children raced past him with painted cheeks and sticky fingers. Someone played an acoustic version of "Lean on Me" near the entrance. He almost made it out without seeing her. But fate, like spring thaw, had its own timing. "Elena," a voice called from behind him. She turned. Her eyes met his across the makeshift fairgrounds, and something inside her stilled. She walked toward him, each step deliberate. Her boots crunched over gravel still wet with melting snow. In one hand, she held the diary open to the page he had written. Her fingers were trembling. Elena, Grant said, his voice barely audible over the distant music and laughter. She stopped 2 feet away from him. The diary was still open in her hands, pages fluttering slightly in the wind. "You wrote in it," she said. Not a question. A tremble in her throat. He nodded once. "I didn't know how else to say it." Her eyes scanned his face. "How long?" He didn't lie. "Since the bus. Since I found your words. I should have told you sooner." Elena let out a laugh that didn't sound amused. "You walked into my world like a ghost pretending to be someone else, all while holding pieces of me in your coat pocket." "I know," he whispered, "and I hate myself for it." For a long moment she didn't speak. Around them the fair carried on, children giggling near the ring, tossed someone announcing raffle tickets, a whiff of kettle corn in the air. But between them it was hushed, tense. Elena closed the diary gently, cradling it against her chest. "I trusted you," she said. "Not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. You listened. You helped. You showed up. That mattered." Grant swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "But now," she continued, "I don't know which part of you was real." "All of it," he said immediately. "Every shelf I fixed, every coat I zipped on a kid, every cup of tea we shared. That was me. I just didn't know how to be both parts at once. And now," he stepped closer, "now I'm just a man standing in front of the only woman who ever made me want to stay. No title, no disguise, just me." Elena's eyes shimmered, not just from tears, but from everything unsaid between them. Hurt, hope, history rewritten. Before either could speak again, a small voice cut through the space like a ribbon slicing clean. "Mom." They turned. Noah barreled toward them, cheeks flushed from running his winter hat askew. He was holding a crayon drawing in both hands. "I finished," he said breathlessly. "Look, it's you and me, and him." He pointed to the third figure, a tall man with cinnamon-colored scribbles around his head. "You called him Cinnamon Toast Man. Remember?" Noah beamed. because that's what he smells like. Elena's breath caught. She knelt, brushing snow off Noah's jacket. You drew this? Yeah, I made his hand hold yours, like at the movie night. Elena looked up at Grant, who couldn't quite keep the tears from his eyes. Noah turned to him, then completely unaware of the fracture in time between the two adults. Come home, okay, the boy said. It's almost dinner. Grant stared at him, then at Elena. She didn't speak, but she nodded once. Not a full forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning. A doorway. Grant bent to Noah's level. Only if you save me a spot at the table. Noah grinned and grabbed his hand like it had always been his. Later that evening, after the booths had been folded up and the sun dipped behind the old cottonwood trees, the quiet returned. Inside the Sunset Hollow Community Center, the warm hum of the radiators filled the halls. Elena stood alone in the quiet room, where it had all started, the diary pressed to her chest. The same chair where Grant Noe Elliott had once sat now held nothing but sunlight spilled from the high windows. She ran her fingers along the cover's edge, feeling the frayed seams, the worn texture that held so many pieces of her. And now, some of him too. She took a deep breath, then sat at the small wooden table where the last message had been written. Opening the book slowly, she flipped past pages smeared with her own ink-pain jokes, late-night musings, until she reached the newest one. His. The weight of his words still echoed. If you never forgive me, I understand. But he had not begged. He hadn't tried to justify. He had left her the truth and the choice. She stared at the fresh blank page after his message for a long while. Then finally she picked up a pen. Her handwriting had always tilted slightly right, like it was leaning into the future. Today I was seen, and I saw back. She let the ink dry. Downstairs she could hear the faint rattle of Grant's voice as he tried to help Curtis stack chairs, and failing apparently by the sound of a minor crash and a string of mumbled apologies. Delilah laughed somewhere near the entrance, and Noah's voice, bright and high, floated up the stairwell as he described in enthusiastic detail his ring-toss victory to anyone who'd listen. Elena smiled. She closed the diary and tucked it into the drawer beneath the table. Not because the story was over, but because it had finally begun. In the quiet corners of winter, where loneliness often hides in plain sight, a stranger chose kindness and was changed by it. Sometimes the most powerful connections come not from grand gestures, but from noticing the invisible and staying long enough to matter. When we stop judging by appearances, we give grace the space to work its quiet magic. Like a diary left on a cold bus seat, an unexpected act of care can rewrite more than one life.